Just where is Babylon today? This is part 5 of the Babylon series. Okay, we've been looking at Babylon. We saw that Babylon is a picture of the end-time Christian church. It's false Christianity, which in some degree has always existed. And we see Babylon will be specialized in spiritual fornication, which we found in its previous part was the worship of gods and idols. And that's always been spiritual fornication throughout the Old Testament. But where is spiritual Babylon today? We welcome you to visit the website, therockofoffense.com, for a more detailed Bible study on this topic. Okay, so Babylon has always existed. But we see that the Tower of Babel was the first kingdom, and we looked at that in part 2 of this series, that the Tower of Babel was created by Nimrod, and the people wanted to become like God and reach heaven and make a name for themselves. We also see that the kingdom of Babylon was heavily involved with the destruction of Jerusalem, and that's recorded in the Old Testament, in 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, Jeremiah, etc. And we see that both Israel and Judah, the southern 2 tribes of Judah and the northern 10 tribes of Israel, became part of Babylon. They were incorporated into Babylon when they were taken into captivity. And we find that all through the Old Testament prophets. And so we see now, we come to the book of Revelation, we find that Babylon is sitting on the scarlet beast, and we saw the scarlet beast as a picture of Satan. It's the beast that was, is not, which means Satan was bound during the church age, but he still existed, he still was. And at the great tribulation he shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. And we see also the 7 kings, the 7 horns, the 7 heads of the beast. 5 were fallen. 1 existed in 1st century AD when the book of Revelation was written, and 1 shall come. And again, that's the Antichrist of the Great Tribulation. We saw in part 1 of this series that the Protestant reformers over 500 years ago, they came to the conclusion that Babylon was the Roman Catholic Church. And their conclusion was based on the symbols of Revelation 17 and 18. And at the time, it appeared, because the Roman Catholic Church was essentially the dominant church, and it was easy for them to point at the Roman Catholic Church as Babylon. But time now has showed us that they were not yet in the end-time Christian church of the Great Tribulation. Satan, until the Great Tribulation, Satan's still bound. The Antichrist and the abomination of desolation have not yet been revealed until the Great Tribulation. So, and we recall the false prophet of the Great Tribulation will have 2 horns. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but do the 2 horns represent a combination of Catholicism and Protestant? We don't know for sure. But anyway, if you enjoy these videos, please consider subscribing. There's a little red button in the bottom right-hand corner. Thank you. Okay, so let's go on in our study, and we find in Revelation 17 that Babylon sits on 3 places. The scarlet-colored beast, which we know is Satan, the 7 mountains, which we know is the kingdom of Satan, and then this concept about the many waters. So let's go through these relatively quickly and find the spiritual meaning of these 3 items. Okay, let's turn to the scarlet-colored beast, where Babylon sat. So we find in the Bible, all through the Bible, that to sit down or to be seated is a place where judgment or dominion comes from. All through the Bible we see rulers who sit on thrones, kings and judges that sit on thrones. For example, Pilate sat down on the judgment seat when he judged Jesus Christ, John 19:13. We see Jesus Christ in Revelation 19:11. He comes as the judge. He comes on a white horse, and he sits on the white horse. He's called faithful and true, and in righteousness does he judge and make war. We also see in Revelation 13:2 that the beast, the dragon gave the beast his authority. The beast in that context is the Antichrist. But the dragon gives him his power, his seat, which is throne, and great authority. So to have a seat or to sit down is a place of authority or dominion. And we see that Babylon is seated on the beast. And in that sense, Satan gives dominion or strength or authority to Babylon. Okay, we also see a close tie to Babylon and the false prophet. We remember the satanic trinity from Revelation. For example, in 13, verse 11 and 12, another beast coming up out of the earth, that's the false prophet, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. The false prophet represents Babylon. It represents the end time false Christian church. And he spoke as a dragon. So he speaks like Satan, and he exercises all the power of the first beast, which is the Antichrist. And we recall that the first beast was given his authority from Satan. So we see that Babylon is the false prophet and part of the satanic trinity. We also see that Babylon, or the false prophet in Revelation 13, is given signs and wonders. He doeth great wonders, so he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had the power to do. That's signs and wonders, and we did a study on that, and I'll tag this slide with that study. And that's how the end-time Christian church will be. All type of wonderful, powerful things. And finally, we find the merchandising. In Revelation 13, the false prophet merchandise Christianity, just as what Babylon does. The false prophet causes all to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man may buy or sell or be merchandise save he that hath the mark. And we're going to look in a future study at the merchandising of Babylon. Okay, we also see that Babylon sits on 7 mountains. And we saw last time that mountains are a symbol of kingdoms. The 7 points to the perfection, the completion, the perfect Satan's kingdom that exists, the completion of his kingdom. Mountains are not just literal, they're just as kings are symbols of leaders, so mountains are symbols of kingdoms. And we see that very clearly in Daniel chapter 2. The stone that smote this great image of Nebuchadnezzar became a great mountain. And that stone points to Christ. And as the mountain destroys the kingdom of Satan and filled the whole earth. In the days of these kings shall God set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And we see that the stone is a kingdom that destroys all these other kingdoms in the great statue in Daniel 2. And we see that Satan controls all the kingdoms of the world. We recall from the temptation of Christ in Matthew 4, the devil take him up to an exceeding high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and said unto them, all these things I will give thee if thou wilt fall down and worship me. And of course Christ didn't do that, but Satan is in control of the kingdoms of this world. God isn't the ultimate sovereign of everything, but Satan has control of the kingdoms and the evil of this world. So the third place that the great whore Babylon sits is on many waters. And we see that defined later in Revelation 17, that the many waters there refers to peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And we can, by looking at Scripture, we can find that the words used for like peoples, it's those who are united in a movement. For example, Christians are all one people. Even though they're not physically together, they're scattered about, but they're all one people. They stand for one thing. For example, American citizens are all one people because they're citizens, not that they necessarily agree, but they're all one people. Same thing with Christians. They don't all necessarily agree, but they're from a lot of different denominations. Multitudes point to people grouped together in one location, but they're also not necessarily in agreement. Citizens, sports fans, rallies, etc. The word nations has to do with ethnicity, tribal factions, people that are from the same roots genetically. Ephesians chapter 2 talks about the nations being those who are not of Israel, but they have ethnicity beyond, outside of Israel. Israel, of course, is the 10 tribes of Israel, or they also have ethnicity. And finally, tongues has to do with language. And that's obvious throughout the Bible, and I have a couple verses there. So the many waters is the fact, very simply, that Babylon is spread all through the world and sits in different locations, different groups of people, all through the world. And that's what we find in Christianity today. Okay, Babylon sits on many waters. We see the parallel scripture in Jeremiah 51:13. Jeremiah 50 and 51, those two chapters are parallel. to Revelation 17 and 18 because they both point to the end, the destruction of Babylon. In Jeremiah 51:13, we find that, O thou that dwells upon many waters, and there it is again, Babylon dwells upon many waters, abundant in treasures. Dwelling on many waters has caused this entity, Babylon, which is the end-time Christian church, to become rich, to be abundant in treasures, and its result in the measure of thy covetousness. And we see that covetousness is the worship of gods and idols, materialism, money, things like that. And we see back in Revelation 18 again, the merchants of Babylon were made rich by Babylon. And that great city was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, all things that point to abundance and richness. For in 1 hour so great riches has come to nothing. The judgment of Babylon is their riches will really come to naught. So we have to ask the question, what religion, what fits the fact that this religion is all through the world and it sits on many peoples, tongues, nations. So let's look at that in the next slide. And we find that only Christianity can fit this description. As we look at statistics, Christianity is clearly the largest religion. By far. Islam is second, followed by Hinduism and Buddhism. But what happens is that Christianity has gone all through the world. You find it everywhere. Others of these religions, they're more isolated, whether it be in the Middle East or in India or in China. But Christianity has a way of permeating throughout the whole world. And in the end time Babylon, Christianity be abundant in treasures and covetousness. It has the common denominator of worldliness. And once again, we're being reconnected through the internet, through social media, and the world has almost a common culture that's going to unite it. In Revelation 18:7, we see that Babylon says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. She sits on the many waters, she sits on the beast, she sits on the mountain, she's worldwide in her extent. She considers herself as a queen. And we know that a queen is a consort to a king. For example, in the book of Esther, Vashti and Esther were both queens, and because they were married to Ahasuerus, the king. And we see that in the Old Testament, Israel was God's bride and considered a queen, considered royalty. Ezekiel 16:13. The true church of all true Christians is the bride of Christ. We reign with Christ. We are a royal generation. True Christians are to be the queen of Christ. That's the true church. So we see Babylon. And this is the false Christian church. The end-time false Christian church is not the bride of Christ. Babylon is an end-time false Christian church, so therefore not a queen. She's really the queen of Satan, the great whore, because she is carried by Satan. Okay, so we also see that Babylon says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. But we find that God's queen, Israel of the Old Testament, when God rejected her, she became as a widow. So we know Babylon, because Babylon will be rejected by God, she will become as a widow. So in Lamentations chapter 1, how does the city sit solitary? That's Jerusalem. It was full of people. She has become a widow. She was great among the nations and a princess among all her lovers. She had no one to comfort her. But we see Jerusalem as a city became a widow. God forsook her because of her worship of other gods and idols. Similarly, Babylon is to be a widow and will see sorrow and torment. Revelation 18, how much she has glorified herself and lived deliciously. So much torment and sorrow give to her. She will see sorrow. She is a widow, for she says in her heart, I sit as a queen and am no widow and shall see no sorrow. But she will see sorrow. Therefore her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine. In Revelation 18:15, the merchant of these things, Babylon's merchants, which we're going to look at in detail in an upcoming study, they were made rich by her. They stand afar off for the fear of her torment, and weeping and wailing. So Babylon will be a widow. She's not God's queen, she's Satan's queen, but she will become a widow and she will see sorrow. Okay, just a summary. So Babylon sits on 3 locations. The scarlet-colored beast, which is Satan. Babylon will have Satan's power and authority. Also, 7 mountains. 7 mountains should not be taken literally. That would violate the interpretation rules for the Bible and the book of Revelation. 7 is perfection. Mountains is a symbol of kingdom. It's 7 kingdoms. There's the perfection of Satan's kingdom, which we know Satan has control over all nations of the world. So it's the whole world, the unsaved world. That's where Babylon is worldly. It's riding the beast. It's riding the worldliness of this world. The many waters points to the diversity of the church, the end-time Christian church. It's all over the place. It's various languages, various ethnic groups, various political areas, various countries, various people with different ideas. So we know that this end-time Christian church will have permeated all through the world. We know that can only be defined by that and many other reasons as the end-time false Christian church. We do bear in mind that the Great Tribulation, the Antichrist will be revealed, the abomination of desolation will be in the holy place, which is worldliness in the church, which to a large degree is already there, and the false prophet will be there, which is tied to Babylon. And the false prophet has 2 horns, so we know there's 2 centers of strength. Horns represent strength. So we wait and see. But we're to be wary. We're to be watchful. We're to be not to be gullible and follow anything anybody tells us. We have to search the scriptures ourselves to come to truth. Follow the true gospel of salvation only by God's grace alone. It's not by free will. It's by God's sovereign pleasure. Is the salvation plan. Next video, we're going to look at a very important topic: who resides in Babylon. And it's very interesting. You're not going to want to miss this study. Please consider subscribing, and thank you for tuning into this video.